fluorescent lights of Patterson's grocery store buzzed faintly above, a sterile hum that did nothing to warm the chilled air. It was the day before Thanksgiving, and the aisles swelled with frantic shoppers, carts brimming with cans, boxes, and the anticipation of holiday feasts. Mark Winston maneuvered his cart mechanically through the crowded lanes, his suit crisp and immaculate, but his posture slack, a quiet fatigue radiating from his every movement. He was a man who could command companies with a glance and fill a warehouse with riches, yet here among the ordinary and the anxious, he felt invisible and hollow. His 6-year-old son, Sebastian, perched in the cart's child seat, swung his legs impatiently, blonde hair catching the overhead light, his small hands gripping the cart handle with purpose. "Daddy, look! All the turkeys!" Sebastian's voice was bright, innocent, untainted by the weight that pressed down on the adults around him. He pointed toward the refrigerated section where birds of every size and price were lined up like gleaming trophies. Mark followed the gesture, his eyes lingering on an organic, free-range turkey priced at $80. To him, money was meaningless, yet the emptiness inside made the abundance around him feel cruelly irrelevant. He nodded quietly to Sebastian, his voice flat. "Yes, buddy. We need to grab one too." Ahead in the line, Vivien Thally knelt briefly to adjust the strap of her daughter's coat, her shoulders aching from 12 hours on her feet at the hospital. Her 7-year-old, Cheryl, clutched a crayon-smeared piece of paper depicting their family around a golden-brown turkey, the centerpiece of a perfect Thanksgiving dinner. Vivien's eyes drifted toward the small turkey display near the checkout, where a 10-pound bird gleamed under a bright orange sale tag. $34.99. A sum that should have been trivial, but in her world it was impossible. Bills were overdue, medical debt loomed like a shadow, and every decision she made seemed to ripple with consequences she could barely absorb. She held the cold plastic-wrapped turkey in her hands for a fleeting moment, imagining Cheryl's delighted face, the simple magic of a holiday dinner they could never really afford. Cheryl's voice broke through her reverie. "Mommy, are we getting a turkey?" "Mrs. Patterson said we're supposed to have turkey for Thanksgiving." The hope in the child's tone was gentle yet piercing. Vivien swallowed the lump in her throat, brushing a strand of hair from Cheryl's face. "I know, sweetheart. Sometimes we do things differently, and that's okay." She placed the turkey back on the shelf, each step toward her cart a battle against despair, every movement a reminder of what she could not give. Sebastian's gaze had been fixed on the mother and daughter the entire time, absorbing every tremor of fear and frustration that marked Vivien's hesitation. He tugged at his father's sleeve with urgent persistence. "Daddy," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet hum between transactions, "that lady can't buy a turkey for her little girl. It's Thanksgiving." The words were simple, unfiltered, and brutal, cutting through the ambient noise like a knife. Heads turned in the checkout line. Some faces shifted in discomfort, some in judgment, but none held the depth of recognition that Mark felt searing through him. Vivien's cheeks burned crimson. She grabbed the groceries she could afford, pasta, a jar of tomato sauce, chicken breasts, and clutched Cheryl's small hand. Together they rushed toward the exit, Vivien's shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs, Cheryl's grip tightening in silent understanding. Mark stood frozen, a strange, unwelcome warmth spreading across his chest. It was not his grief that surged now, but something foreign. Empathy, awareness, the undeniable ache of witnessing another person's private heartbreak exposed in public. For the first time in 3 years since Camille's death, he felt the numbness crack and something fragile and human began to stir inside him. The grocery store, mundane and fluorescent lit, had become a stage for raw, unscripted vulnerability, and Mark Winston was seeing it finally fully in the eyes of a mother and her child. The next morning, the grocery store's fluorescent hum still clung to Mark's senses, even though he was sitting in the quiet of his modern sunlit kitchen, his coffee untouched. The memory of yesterday's checkout line haunted him. Not the stacks of turkeys, not the wealthy shoppers scuttling past, but the small trembling hands of a mother, the silent disappointment of a child, and the words of his own son, blunt and piercing. "That lady can't buy a turkey for her little girl. It's Thanksgiving." They reverberated in his mind like a chime he could not ignore. He found himself staring at Sebastian, who was perched on the counter, drawing with crayons on a sheet of paper, his bright eyes flicking to his father with quiet expectation. "Daddy," Sebastian said, voice low but insistent. "Why was that lady so sad? Did we make her feel bad?" Mark hesitated. Words stuck in his throat. He wanted to soothe, to distract, but the truth gnawed at him. "It's not us, Sebastian. It's the world. Sometimes people just can't afford the things that make them happy." But even that sounded hollow, empty, insufficient to explain the crack of grief and humiliation he had seen etched across Vivien's face. Meanwhile, Vivien Thally had not slept. Her tiny apartment smelled faintly of tomato sauce and reheated chicken, and the faint odor of Cheryl's crayons lingered in the air. Her body ached from yesterday's 12-hour hospital shift, but it was not physical exhaustion that made her restless. It was the shame, the humiliation of being exposed, the suffocating weight of financial failure she could not hide from her daughter's hopeful gaze. She had replayed the moment a dozen times in her mind. The whisper of her hands against the cold turkey, the crushing realization that the simplest act of love, buying a meal for Thanksgiving, was out of reach. Cheryl, ever perceptive, had quietly stacked her crayon drawings in neat piles, her small brow furrowed. "Mommy," she said softly, "maybe next year we'll have a turkey, but this year, we can make it special anyway, right?" Her words were simple, but in them lay a wisdom far beyond her 7 years, and Vivien felt both the sting of regret and the balm of hope at the same time. Back in his high-rise apartment, Mark's mind raced. He knew the hospital Vivien worked at. He could probably trace her schedule, see her struggles on paper, see the exhaustion written across overtime sheets. And yet, there was something about her resilience, the quiet dignity with which she carried her burden that gnawed at the numbness in his own heart. He could give her money, he could buy her a turkey, but he hesitated. Something deep inside resisted the idea of charity that felt transactional or superficial. He wanted her story to be understood, not purchased. Hours later, driven by a mix of curiosity, guilt, and a strange, compelling need to intervene, Mark found himself walking down the aisles of Patterson's again, almost as if his body had a mind of its own. The store hummed with holiday chaos. Families rushed past him, carts brimming, voices overlapping in a cacophony of last-minute Thanksgiving plans. And then he saw her, Vivien, leaning over the pasta aisle, checking expiration dates as if her life depended on it, and Cheryl close by, whispering something about their special dinner. Mark's chest tightened. The sight was ordinary and yet electric, a moment suspended in time, each of them unaware of the other, yet already bound by yesterday's incident. Sebastian tugged at his father's sleeve, sensing the tension. "Daddy, are you going to help her?" he asked. Mark did not answer immediately. He didn't even know what help meant in this moment. Was it stepping in publicly, risking humiliation again? Was it leaving a discreet gift? Was it simply being present, a witness to her struggle? Each possibility pulled him deeper into a moral storm he had long avoided. Vivien, oblivious to the man observing her from across the aisle, debated silently with herself. Should she ask a colleague for help? Should she try to borrow money from a friend? Or should she simply accept the quiet desperation of her life and find some small secret way to make the day feel like Thanksgiving for Cheryl? Each option carried its own humiliation, its own risk of heartbreak. And all the while, she did not know that someone who could solve this problem with the flick of a pen or the swipe of a credit card, was watching, weighing their own grief against the possibility of changing her world forever. Mark's gaze lingered on Vivien's back, and for the first time since Camille's death, he felt a surge of emotion he could neither name nor control. It was empathy, yes, but also awe, and an ache that reminded him that money, power, and titles could never buy the simplest human connection, the dignity of a mother, and the innocence of a child hoping for one perfect meal. And in that hum of the fluorescent-lit store amidst the chaos and the ordinary, a silent promise formed. Something was going to change. though neither Vivien nor Mark could yet see how. Days passed after the grocery store incident, but Mark Winston could not shake the image of Vivien Thally and her small daughter. Even in the boardroom, surrounded by glossy quarterly reports and the hum of printers, his thoughts wandered to the exhaustion etched into Vivien's shoulders, the quiet dignity she carried like armor, and the heartbreaking hope in Cheryl's eyes. He found himself retracing every step he had taken that afternoon in the store. The way Vivien had clutched the $35 turkey, the tremor in her hands, the flush of humiliation on her cheeks when Sebastian's words cut through the silence. It was as if some invisible thread had tethered his consciousness to theirs, pulling him into a story he could not escape. Sebastian, oblivious to the complexities of financial strain, still brought up the woman in passing. "Daddy, I keep thinking about the lady and her little girl. Did they go home hungry?" The question, innocent as it was, stabbed Mark more sharply than any corporate crisis ever could. He had no answer. He wanted to tell his son that some problems could be solved with money, but he knew even that truth was incomplete. It wasn't just about a turkey, it was about dignity, hope, and the small victories of life that money could never buy. Meanwhile, Vivien's days were a series of quiet struggles punctuated by small acts of defiance. She refused to let the humiliation of the grocery store define her. At the hospital, she worked double shifts, her body aching, yet her mind always circling Cheryl's happiness. Every lunch she skipped, every extra hour she worked, was for the hope that she could create a moment of magic, even without the luxury of a golden brown turkey. She found solace in routine, the careful folding of Cheryl's school drawings, the quiet preparation of pasta sauce that simmered with the aroma of effort and love, the whispered reassurances that somehow they would survive. They would be enough. But beneath the surface, Vivien was unraveling. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Sebastian's innocent face, the echo of his blunt words haunting her. "That lady can't buy a turkey for her little girl." She felt the sting of shame anew, imagining the judgment of strangers and the disappointment she feared Cheryl would someday internalize. And yet, the very thing that cut her, her vulnerability in public, was also what would eventually draw Mark into her world. Mark, too, was changing. The sterile walls of his office suddenly seemed oppressive, suffocating in their perfection. He began noticing the minutiae of human life he had long ignored, the cashier's weary smile, the way a mother's hand trembled as she tried to protect her child from disappointment, the unspoken weight that people carried through the aisles of the world. He started frequenting the grocery store not to shop for himself, but under the guise of chance lingering in the background, studying Vivien from a distance. Each encounter, fleeting and unremarkable to her, was electric to him. Every glance, every small act of resilience, fed something deep within, a recognition of what it meant to struggle and survive without the cushion of wealth. Suspense built like a low hum in the narrative of their lives. Mark wrestled with himself. Should he intervene publicly, risking humiliation? Should he leave gifts anonymously, an invisible hand of aid? Or should he remain a silent observer, letting fate decide whether their paths would converge again? Every choice carried weight, every hesitation a potential moral failure. Vivien's life, in contrast, pressed forward like a delicate, trembling tightrope. Each decision, whether to buy bread or milk first, whether to let Cheryl stay up a little later to help in the kitchen, was a negotiation with scarcity. She crafted small moments of joy, decorating their apartment with paper turkeys, turning the pasta they could afford into a feast with laughter and music, holding her daughter close even as shame lingered like a shadow. And yet, she could not erase the memory of the previous grocery store encounter, the public exposure of her limits, a memory that had planted a quiet fear she might never overcome. And so the tension simmered. Two lives orbiting the same space, bound by a shared human struggle, yet separated by circumstance, pride, and fear. The city hummed outside, indifferent to their quiet suffering and growing awareness, while inside each of them the slow drumbeat of destiny began. Something was about to change, though neither Mark nor Vivien could yet see how, or what that change would demand of their pride, their grief, and their hearts. Mark's apartment felt unusually silent that evening, the hum of the city below barely penetrating the glass walls that had always made him feel untouchable. But tonight the silence was a weight, pressing into his chest like a fist. He poured himself a glass of wine, but the taste was bitter and hollow. Sebastian sat cross-legged on the floor, assembling a puzzle, humming softly to himself, the bright innocence of childhood a stark contrast to the gnawing unease in Mark's mind. "I want to see them again," Sebastian said suddenly, his voice tentative but insistent. Mark froze, the glass halfway to his lips. "Them?" he asked, though he already knew. "The lady and the little girl, the one from the store," Sebastian said, eyes bright. "I want to see if they're okay. I don't want them to be sad on Thanksgiving." Mark set the wine down, fingers tightening around the stem. He had spent nights analyzing spreadsheets, contracts, and boardroom negotiations, but none of it felt urgent now. None of it carried the weight of a child's hope. And so the decision formed in his mind, not fully conscious, not entirely rational, but undeniable. He would find Vivien Thally again. The next morning, the grocery store was bathed in a pale winter light, casting long shadows across aisles crowded with last-minute shoppers. Mark walked slowly, deliberately, each step measured so as not to alarm the woman he sought. Vivien was there naturally, instinctively, her cart modest, her attention entirely on Cheryl, who danced around the frozen section, chattering about their Thanksgiving plans. She didn't notice him at first. Mark lingered in the next aisle, pretending to examine boxes of artisan stuffing, but his gaze never left Vivien. He watched the tension in her shoulders as she debated the weight of her purchases, the subtle, practiced gestures that spoke of someone used to carrying burdens alone. Cheryl tugged at her mother's coat, her small voice cutting through the noise. "Mommy, let's make it a party. Just you and me." Vivien smiled, but it was a fragile thing, like a candle flickering against the wind. Mark felt a pang in his chest, a mixture of envy and longing. Here was a mother who could transform scarcity into joy, who could turn desperation into ritual, who carried a child's happiness above her own. And he realized sharply that he had not been able to do that since Camille's death. Not fully. Sebastian tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, will you help her?" Mark swallowed hard. I don't know," he whispered, though the answer was already clear in the knot tightening in his stomach. He needed to act, but the rules of human dignity, of pride, of fear, made every step feel like walking on a wire over an endless void. Vivien moved closer to the frozen turkey section, her fingers brushing the plastic-wrapped birds, hesitation written on every line of her face. Mark's chest constricted. This moment, simple, ordinary, yet fraught with despair, demanded intervention. He could buy the turkey, yes. He could step forward, hands outstretched, and change the course of this day. But he hesitated, torn between the desire to help and the fear of humiliating her again. Then Sebastian, as if sensing his father's struggle, spoke again, quietly but with certainty. "Daddy, she's just like us. She loves her daughter. Isn't that enough reason to help?" Mark's resolve crystallized. He took a slow, deliberate step toward Vivien, but stopped short, letting the moment stretch, letting tension coil like a spring between them. He studied her again, the tired curve of her shoulders, the worn scrubs under her coat, the subtle but unwavering focus on her child. There was vulnerability there, yes, but also a quiet strength that made him feel both awe and fear. How does one enter the life of someone who has never asked for help? Someone who carries her dignity as a shield without shattering it. As Vivien turned, finally noticing him in the aisle, their eyes met. A spark of recognition flashed, though she could not place it. Something in his presence was familiar, urgent, perhaps even dangerous in its intensity. Mark felt the pulse of suspense in the space between them. A collision of worlds not yet spoken, a story about to bend toward inevitability. And in that moment, the ordinary grocery store, the fluorescent lights, the hum of cash registers, the scent of cold poultry and detergent, transformed into a crucible. Pride, grief, hope, and fear hung in the air, coiled and taut. Each heartbeat, each hesitant step, carried the weight of the decisions yet to come, the vulnerabilities yet to be revealed, and the quiet promise of transformation that neither of them could yet name. The next few hours were a blur for Vivien, yet every detail seared itself into Mark's memory. She moved through the grocery store with a quiet determination, navigating aisles as though each choice carried the weight of her entire world. Her hands lingered over discounted vegetables, her eyes darted between price tags and the small checklist she kept tucked in her coat pocket, the one that chronicled every necessity Cheryl might need for the coming week. Mark watched from a distance, hidden behind the display of canned pumpkin, heart tightening with each hesitant glance she threw toward the frozen turkey section. He wanted to step forward to intervene, but each step toward her felt like crossing a line into her private struggle, a line he knew he must tread carefully. Sebastian's small hand slipped into his father's as he whispered, "Daddy, can't we do something? She's trying so hard." The simplicity of the statement struck Mark harder than any boardroom victory or financial success. Here was a child unjaded, unburdened by the complications of pride, making the moral decision crystal clear. Action had to be taken. And yet he hesitated. He could sense the fragility of the moment, the razor-thin balance between helping and shaming, between dignity and humiliation. Vivien finally reached the display, her fingers brushing the plastic wrap of the $35 turkey once again. She froze, her breath catching in her throat as if the cold air from the freezer mirrored the chill of her fear and humiliation. Cheryl tugged at her sleeve, the little girl's wide eyes alight with hope. "Mommy, please?" Vivien's hand trembled, a physical manifestation of the internal battle raging in her heart. Pride versus love, fear versus desire to give her daughter a moment of joy. Mark felt it in his chest, that electric surge of empathy that demanded action. He stepped forward, this time making his presence known, though carefully, subtly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but carrying authority. Not the authority of a wealthy CEO, but the authority of someone willing to acknowledge pain and act upon it. Vivien flinched, instinctively shrinking back as if anticipating judgment. The moment froze in the air between them, tense, charged, delicate. I couldn't help but notice," Mark began, unsure of the words but certain of the intention. "I know it's not my place and I don't want to intrude, but—" He faltered because in that instant, he realized just how heavy the responsibility of offering help could be. One wrong word, one misstep, and the fragile shield Vivien had constructed could shatter. Vivien straightened, meeting his gaze, the weight of exhaustion and skepticism etched into every line of her face. "And what would that be?" she asked quietly, her tone neutral but guarded, as if measuring the sincerity of a stranger with the precision of a surgeon. Cheryl tugged on her mother's sleeve, leaning into her side, silent but alert, a small anchor of hope and fear. I'd like to help," Mark said finally, the words sounding foreign even to himself. "Not because I think I can fix everything, but because some things shouldn't have to be fixed alone." He gestured subtly to the turkey display. "Some moments matter more than money, and I'd like to make sure your daughter has the Thanksgiving she deserves." Vivien's chest tightened, a mixture of disbelief, pride, and caution flooding her senses. She had spent so long shouldering burdens alone that even the idea of help felt like a threat to her autonomy. I can manage," she whispered, almost more to herself than to him. "We always manage." Sebastian, sensing the tension, tugged at Mark's sleeve again, voice urgent. "Daddy, or please, don't let her do it alone." Vivien's eyes flicked between the two menacingly silent figures, Mark and Sebastian, and she felt something shift, though she could not name it. The weight of yesterday's humiliation pressed down, but beneath it, a seed of hope trembled, fragile and uncertain. Here was a man, stranger, yet not, willing to step into her world without judgment, without expectation, simply to honor her love for her daughter. Mark placed a hand near the turkey, careful not to touch it, careful not to presume. "You don't have to decide now," he said softly. "I just want you to know the choice isn't yours alone this time." And in that suspended moment, the ordinary fluorescent-lit grocery store transformed into something extraordinary, a battlefield of pride, empathy, and human connection. The tension was almost unbearable. Every breath, every movement, every glance carried the weight of possibility and disaster. Vivien could walk away and protect her dignity, or she could step into the unknown and accept help, risking vulnerability for the chance at joy somewhere. In that charged silence, Cheryl's small hand reached for her mother's, anchoring her, reminding her that love could outweigh fear. Mark, standing a few feet away, felt his own heart tremble, realizing that this was more than an act of charity. It was the moment that could redefine all of their lives. And as the fluorescent lights hummed above, the first spark of transformation flickered, fragile but undeniable, promising a Thanksgiving none of them would ever forget. The air in Vivien's small apartment was thick with the aroma of simmering pasta sauce, garlic, and the faint tang of reheated chicken. It should have felt ordinary, routine even, yet tonight carried the electric hum of anticipation and anxiety. Vivien moved through the cramped space with quiet precision, stirring, chopping, and tasting, each motion a silent act of love for Cheryl. The little girl skipped between the counter and the table, her small hands busy arranging plates and napkins, her eyes sparkling with a mixture of hope and mischief. Vivien's mind, however, was elsewhere. She could still feel the weight of Mark Winston's presence in the grocery store, the authority in his voice, the careful restraint in his movements. Was it pity? Generosity? Or something more complicated? Something that threatened to unravel her meticulously guarded pride. She told herself it didn't matter. They had no place in her world, no right to interfere. She would make this Thanksgiving perfect. Her way with what she had, even if it meant sacrifices she could never admit aloud. Meanwhile, Mark and Sebastian had returned to their own routine, yet neither could forget that small, determined mother and her daughter. Sebastian had asked incessantly if there was a way to help without embarrassing them, his childlike moral compass pointing out inequities Mark had long ignored. By the afternoon, Mark's resolve had solidified. He would act, but discreetly, delicately, respecting the boundaries he had so carefully measured. The city outside moved on, indifferent to his deliberation, while inside the tension coiled tighter, waiting to snap. That evening, as Vivien brought the pasta to a simmer, a soft knock echoed at her door. Her heart jumped, not with hope, but with instinctive caution. Who could it be at this hour? She wiped her hands on a towel, her pulse quickening. Cheryl, sensing her mother's unease, peered around her leg, eyes wide. Vivien took a breath and opened the door. There on her doorstep was a small package, a perfectly wrapped frozen turkey, accompanied by a simple note in elegant handwriting. For Cheryl, from someone who sees your love and your effort. Happy Thanksgiving. There was no signature, no indication of origin beyond the careful attention to detail. Vivien froze, her fingers brushing the paper, the plastic, the promise within. For a moment, the world contracted to that singular, impossible gesture. Cheryl's eyes widened, her small voice trembling with disbelief. "Mommy, did someone—" Vivien pulled her daughter close, fighting tears she refused to shed in front of the child. Pride, shock, gratitude, and a fragile hope collided inside her chest. How could someone, anyone, see their struggle so clearly, understand it so perfectly, and act without fanfare or expectation? Mark, watching from a distance as carefully orchestrated by fate and timing, felt the weight of the moment press against him. He had chosen anonymity for reasons he could not fully articulate. To reveal himself now would risk breaking Vivien's dignity, could twist her gratitude into discomfort or shame. And yet he knew he could not remain hidden forever. He would have to step forward, but not yet. The suspense of anticipation, the uncertainty of how she would respond, stretched like a taut wire between them. Vivien hesitated, the note trembling in her hands. She read and reread it, each word sinking deeper, unraveling the tight coil of fear and pride she had carried for so long. Slowly, almost reverently, she began to prepare the turkey, her motions now filled with a strange, luminous energy. Cheryl danced around her, helping with utensils, measuring cups and garnishes, her laughter filling the apartment in a way that made every shadow of yesterday retreat. In that small, ordinary apartment, the extraordinary unfolded. Love, pride, fear, and joy intertwined in delicate choreography. Vivien realized that her world had been touched by someone who saw her. Not her financial struggles, not her exhaustion, but her devotion, her heart. The suspense, the fear, the humiliation, all of it began to dissolve into something fragile and profound. Trust. And somewhere outside, Mark felt the subtle tremor of connection. He had initiated a change without interfering, had set in motion a quiet miracle that would reshape the lives of this small family. Yet he also knew the final step loomed, the revelation that he, the man of wealth and power, had been the unseen hand guiding this moment of joy. That revelation would test pride, vulnerability, and forgiveness in ways he could not yet predict. The apartment smelled of simmering triumph and quiet tears, of victory without fanfare. For Vivien and Cheryl, the night promised warmth and laughter, a Thanksgiving forged from ingenuity, courage, and unseen kindness. For Mark, it was a revelation of his own humanity, a spark that had lain dormant through grief and isolation, now roaring to life. And for all of them, the suspense of what would come next, truth revealed, identities disclosed, hearts opened, hung in the air like the delicate aroma of roasted turkey, intoxicating and impossible to ignore. The apartment was alive with the soft hum of a heater and the occasional crackle from the small speaker playing classical music. Steam curled upward from the perfectly browned turkey Vivien had prepared, filling the modest space with a scent that promised warmth, fullness, and the fleeting magic of a holiday truly felt. Cheryl darted back and forth, placing plates, folding napkins, and whispering instructions to herself as though orchestrating a grand banquet, her bright eyes alight with anticipation. Vivien watched her daughter, the tiny movements etched into her heart, and felt the heavy weight of the past week dissolve just a fraction. And then the knock came, not tentative this time, but deliberate, steady, impossible to ignore. Vivien's pulse quickened. Her hand hovered over the door, hesitant, trembling. Cheryl peeked over her mother's shoulder. "Mommy, who is it?" Vivien swallowed hard. "I don't know, sweetheart. Let's just see." As she opened the door, there he stood, taller than she remembered, suit jacket removed, sleeves rolled up, hands empty but presence commanding. Mark Winston, the man whose eyes had haunted her grocery store encounter, whose unseen hand had delivered the turkey she had been too proud to accept publicly, whose careful distance had kept him both a stranger and a savior. "Vivien," he said softly, almost reverently, as if her name alone carried the gravity of a lifetime of struggle. "I wanted to explain about the turkey." Vivien's eyes narrowed, her chest tightening, suspicion and pride warring with the fragile thread of gratitude she felt. "Explain?" she asked, voice steady but tight. "It doesn't matter who sent it. Someone cared enough to help. That's all that matters." "No," Mark said, taking a step forward. "It matters. Because it was me. I saw you. I saw you with Cheryl. I saw the way you fought every day just to keep hope alive, and I wanted to make sure she had Thanksgiving even if the world couldn't give it to her." Vivien froze, the words sinking like stones into the well of her disbelief. She wanted to deny it, to protect herself from the vulnerability that surged in her chest, but the truth shimmered in the air, undeniable and raw. Cheryl gasped softly, eyes wide, understanding at once without fully knowing that something extraordinary was happening. You did this?" Vivien whispered, voice cracking. She wanted to laugh, cry, scream all at once, but the years of exhaustion and sacrifice left her voice brittle, trembling. "Why, you don't even know me." Mark's gaze softened, haunted by his own grief. The years of isolation, the empty luxury of a life devoid of connection. "I know enough," he said. "Enough to see what love looks like even without money. Enough to know that some things, some moments deserve protection. You protect her, Vivien. I just wanted to help." Cheryl ran forward, wrapping her small arms around his waist. "Thank you," she whispered, voice muffled against his coat. Vivien stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached for him, for the human connection she had been starved of, for the acknowledgement of struggle and care. Pride and fear collided, but for the first time, she let them fall away. Mark realized in that moment that the barriers between them, the wealth, the grief, the fear of judgment, were meaningless when confronted with the raw simplicity of human need and love. He had entered her world cautiously, tentatively, but now he stepped fully into it, knowing that the act of revealing himself was also an act of trust. They moved together to the table. Plates were filled, laughter tentative but growing. The city beyond the apartment walls continued its indifferent rhythm, but inside a different reality unfolded, one of connection, of recognition, of joy reclaimed. Mark watched Vivien laugh softly at something Cheryl said, and felt a warmth he had not known in years. He was not rescuing her, he realized. She had always been resilient, brilliant, and whole, but he could be part of the life she had so fiercely protected. Hours passed like minutes. Stories were shared, memories exchanged, quiet tears shed, and smiles blossomed. Mark's presence was not intrusive. It was a mirror, reflecting the dignity, strength, and love Vivien had carried alone. And somewhere in that unassuming apartment, amidst the simmering pasta, the roasted turkey, and the laughter of a child, something extraordinary happened. Two broken families, each scarred in different ways, began to merge, to heal, to find in each other the warmth and connection they had thought lost. As the night deepened, Vivien realized something that had eluded her for years. Help did not have to come with strings. Gratitude did not have to mean submission, and love, unexpected, uninvited, yet fiercely present, could transform even the most ordinary moments into something sacred. Mark watched her realization. The subtle shift in her posture, the way Cheryl's small hand clutched hers tightly, and knew that the real gift of Thanksgiving had nothing to do with turkey, pasta, or wealth. It had everything to do with presence, empathy, and the courage to open one's heart. And in the quiet aftermath, as dishes were cleared and the city lights shimmered beyond the windows, they all understood. Some acts of kindness, some connection, some sparks of courage could alter lives forever. The world had been indifferent yesterday, but tonight in that small apartment it had been transformed. By bravery, by love, and by a single unseen act that became a miracle.